So this discussion is going to be about academic honesty in CSCE 430. And the reason I'm going through all of this is that this is a class where some of the issues that are raised may be a little unclear. And I want to make sure people understand what the expectations are and have a lot of clarity on what's allowed and what's not allowed. So let me just first emphasize that, kind of as a reminder, the whole point of this class is for you to improve your skills, both in understanding problems and in learning how to code. This is an elective class. You shouldn't be in here unless you're wanting to improve in those things. So if you take some of the shortcuts that we talk about here, that's going to really interfere with that. So regardless of what's allowed or not, just stay away from these things because that's kind of defeating the whole purpose of taking the class. I promise you there are much easier routes to get credit for courses that you need than to do this class. So if you are only here for the credit, I would strongly recommend taking a different course, and I'll leave it at that. So what I really want to do is clarify what's allowed and not regarding communicating with other people using online resources and using some of the AI tools. So I'm going to go through several scenarios in each of these areas and kind of talk about what's okay and what's not. And hopefully that'll make it really clear by the end of this what you're allowed to do and what you aren't. So generally, just keep in mind if you are copying code, because this class, it's so easy to cheat in, I'm going to tend to try to be tougher than I would be in other circumstances even to so I'll be looking for an F-star penalty if you are caught. There's also a required acknowledgement that you will have to fill out that says you understand everything. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. So, a couple of things to keep in mind is we've got two stages in the course. We've got problems that you solve in a timed environment. So that's either in lab or it's during the week when you have the first set of problems. And during that period of time, you need to be looking at everything completely on your own without any outside resources in terms of getting help, figuring out how to solve the problem, much less how to code it. So during those main times, we're trying to say, can you look at the problem? Can you figure out how to, what algorithms are needed, what you need to do to solve it? And then also, can you code it? And then we also have the upsolve period. And the upsolve period is where the first stage of that is something that you can get help with. It's fine to get help with it. So you can ask other people, you can talk to other people. We'll go over in class how to solve problems. But the reason you can still get half credit is so that you can actually code the results. It's practice on the coding side of things. So it's not the full credit that you would get for doing the problem analysis, but you still get the credit for the code. So you should still be writing any sort of code completely on your own. So I'm going to first talk about situations about working with other people. Keep in mind, if you haven't solved things yet, you need to be really careful about what you say. You're supposed to be working on figuring out how to solve things by yourself. Now, it is okay to talk to other people about what a question is asking. Like if you really don't understand the purpose of the question, it's just you have to be careful that you're not going into what's the solution method as you're doing this, but actually saying, what is this asking us to do? I don't understand it, something like that. That is okay to ask other people. Later on, if you're in the upsolving period, it's completely fine to talk to other people about how to solve the problem, but you should still be working on the actual coding yourself. Now, I say all of this, and I want to clarify that you have to use some common sense. It's okay to talk to other people about, basic language syntax, and it might be that if you have a really persistent bug, you could potentially get help from other people. You can always get help from the TAs and myself, but use some common sense here. I'm not saying that you have to be completely walled off and silent and not talk to anyone else, but I'm wanting you to actually write the code yourself. So I'm going to go through some examples here and want you to think about, before I go to the next slide on each one, whether it's an okay situation or not. So here's an example conversation. Person one says, we're supposed to read in coordinates. Do we need to handle floating point numbers or just integers? And person two says, I just read in integers and it worked fine. So I want you to think, is that an okay conversation or is that a problem? Is that something that they shouldn't have had that conversation? Okay, well, this is an okay conversation because this is going about understanding the problem itself. It's helping you understand what is the problem asking for. It's not saying, how do I code it or what's my solution method? It's the problem. Now, ideally, the problem is going to specify this. And so person two probably could have just said something like, I think the problem stated this, read it again. And that would have been enough. But overall, that's an okay conversation. Okay, what about this one? Person one says, is this one we're supposed to use dynamic programming for, or does a greedy approach work? And person two says, you need to use dynamic programming. The greedy one won't handle all of this. Is that one okay? No, at least not during the first period, because this is going to how to solve a problem. Knowing whether to apply greedy algorithms versus dynamic programming, that's an analysis and solution method question. Okay, so that's not okay to talk about, at least during the primary problem period. Now, during upsolving, it's fine to have this conversation. In fact, you're more than welcome to. I'd encourage you to talk to other people about how to solve a problem like this. Um, so, uh, so keep in mind, upsolving, yes, this is okay, but the main problem time, something like this would not be. Okay, here's another one. Can you look at my code and see why I'm not getting the total number correct? Someone else says, you're double counting some cases. You need to make sure you're counting each solution only once. Is this one okay? Well, probably not. Okay, this seems to be asking someone to actually look at your code and help you determine if your method is right or not. And then the response is talking about, no, here's what you're doing wrong. And it's having to do with like the solution method. Now, I will say there might be times, like if this was a persistent bug and we were past the initial period, and person two had already solved it, and you were trying to get just some debugging help, this is maybe okay. Because it's more about conceptual issues at that point and less about how do I code it up. So there might be some very limited circumstances where this would be okay, but for the most part, this would not be an okay conversation. All right, how about this one? Can you look at my code and tell me why this angle computation isn't working? I take sine of 30 and it's wrong. And someone says, it looks like you need to convert from degrees to radians. Is this an okay conversation? Well, actually, this one probably is okay, because it's not really going to the solution method, and it's not really actually going to, the like, how do I code up things? This is more of a language feature. It's saying, oh, that takes in radians instead of degrees. Keep in mind that you want to do that. Now, something that would not be okay is if someone said, oh, you don't want to compute the angle. You should do something else instead, because that's going to how to solve the problem. But otherwise, this feels more like a language issue. And that's the sort of thing it's okay to talk to people about. Hey, how does this function work? How does that function work? What's the syntax for this? That sort of thing is okay. All right, another one. How do I check for end of input when I don't know how many lines to read? And someone says, well, if you try to read a line, then you can check whether cn.eof is true or not to see if you've read to the end of input. Is that an okay conversation? Yeah, this is fine. This is a general language issue. It's talking about just something in general. Even though it might be needed for the problem, that's not going to be the point of the problem. So something like that is a reasonable thing to talk with other people about. It's not going to the solution. All right, here's another one. I don't know how to code up Dijkstra's algorithm. And person two says, here, I've coded it before. Let me do it for you. Is this okay? Well, hopefully this is obvious. No, this is not okay unless person one and person two are teammates during a team lab, and then it's fine. But otherwise, I can't imagine why anyone would think this is okay. This should be obviously not okay under any circumstance, other than if you're already on a team. Okay, one more. I'm trying to create a pair of pairs, but I keep getting a compile error. Do you know what the problem is? And the other person says, oh, you need an extra space between your closing brackets so it's clear that it's ending a template and not writing a stream operator. Or you could compile with the C++11 flags. Okay, so is this okay? Well, yes, again, this is basic syntax and how to use language features. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, it's the example that you see down there. The one on the bottom is okay, even in early C++ versions. The one on the top, you need C++11 or later for it to be okay. Anyway, But this, in any case, it's a basic syntax language feature issue. It's not going to something about how to solve a problem or even like how do I code up an algorithm or anything like that. It's more just here's syntax error. What does this mean? Sort of thing. Okay. How about this one? Hey, I solved problem C. That was tricky. Person two says, oh, I've been trying, but I keep failing on test case 4. Person 1 says, oh, that got me too. Make sure you're handling the case where input is 0. Is that okay? And no, it's not. And the reason for that is it is basically telling someone, oh, this is what you're doing wrong. This is how to solve it. You are not considering this type of input. Um, so the best thing you could say is that got me too. Now, if it's during the upsolve period, it might be okay to say something like this because it's just going to, here's the type of thing you need to solve. Oh, you have to remember to handle edge cases. You're not actually doing the coding. You're not actually like helping them write the code, but you're helping them understand that. So a kind of borderline thing would be like, make sure you're handling an edge case so that maybe then they think about 0. So it's probably better not to say that, but that's kind of on the edge of what should be okay or not. But just flat out telling them, here's the case you're failing on, not so good. Okay, so hopefully that clarified what's okay and not okay to talk with other people about. So now I want to run through some examples of using online resources. And so I want you to realize, and this is probably going to be apparent to you if you ever, just start looking around, we're going to be using problems in the class, many of which are open problems available in an open system. And that means that people have solved them before and you can find solutions out there. In some cases, you can find people who've posted code to solve them. In some cases, you can find where people have written up a description of how to solve something. And so these things, it is possible to cheat. It makes it easy to cheat if you are a dishonest person. So if you look, you're going to be able to find these things, but they're not okay to look at. And hopefully it's kind of obvious that they're not okay to look at. Now, the exception, again, just to be clear, is during the upsolve period, you could look at descriptions of how to solve something. In fact, I'm going to give you those in class. I'm going to give you PowerPoints that talk about it. We're going to go over it in class about how to solve problems so that you can upsolve them. But during the main problem period, you shouldn't even look at stuff about how to solve problems. You should only try to figure things out on your own. It's that thought, trying to develop that thought process is why we're doing this class. So let's talk about what is okay to use. So if we've done something in class or there's code or descriptions from the textbook, you're welcome to use those. Now, honestly, I would rather you, even the textbook code, I would rather you write your own version of it. But if you get the textbook and you use that, since it's an official class resource, you are allowed to do that. You are also allowed to look at descriptions of general algorithms, not for the particular problem. So I'm not saying, oh, look up this problem and how to solve it. Okay. But if you want to say like, oh, I don't remember how to do a depth first search, I want to go find that out. It's okay to look up a description of depth first search. Now, that does not mean it's okay to copy the code for depth first search. Honestly, that's kind of a little bit of a borderline area. But, I would recommend you always code stuff up yourself. But again, if it's in the textbook, you can use the code that's there. Okay, hopefully that's clear. Also, if there's a library that's provided in a language like the STL and C++, you can certainly use that. So you don't have to implement your own, vector class or something. You use vectors in C++, you use hash functions, you use all that sort of stuff that's available for you. If you are wondering if you're ever uncertain about whether something's there, check with me. Just in general, assume it's not okay unless I say it is okay. If you do end up using external code, say you copy code from the book, I expect you to document that in the code itself. You need to put in comments saying exactly where you got it from. If you're clear where you got it from, it's not going to be an honor code violation. At the worst, I would say you copied too much code from something in the book or whatever, you don't get credit for it. But it's not gonna be like an honor code violation as long as you're very, very clear about it. But you need to you need to cite it in all those cases if you ever do use code like that. So here's some examples on using things. So someone says, I found someone's GitHub where he posted his solution to that problem. I just used that. Hopefully it's obvious that that's never okay. And just as a reminder, because I run into students all the time who don't seem to have this in their head, it is not okay to just use any code available on the web. Because something's on the web does not mean that it's okay for you to use it. There are people who get in lots and lots of trouble, even in corporate environments, when they start using things that they find in other places. It can create all sorts of headaches. So don't think that just because something's on the web, it's a public domain thing. Okay, another example. So there's a problem from the 2018 ACM World Finals, and oh, I found a description that described the problems from the finals, and I read through that description. Is that okay or not? Well, during the upsolve period, that's okay, because that's talking about how to solve it. But it's not okay during the initial assignment time, because that's telling you how to solve the problem, and that's something you're supposed to be thinking through on your own during that first period. Another example. I didn't look at the problem solution, but I found some test data that could be used for the problem, and I used that. Is that okay or not? No. So test data is something you should be coming up with. It is not something you should be using from someone else. Now, you can discuss the type of test data during upsolving, like, oh, you need to handle edge cases or handle this, this particular type of case. But you should still write those up yourself. So writing test cases is like writing code. That's something that you should be uh, coming up with on your own. All right, what about this? Oh, I used the suffix array code from the book to solve the problem. Is that okay? Well, yes, that's okay. Like I said, if it's from the book, you're allowed to use it. So there's nothing, I'm not in trouble for using. However, please make sure that you understand how the code is working. And I would strongly recommend you always code something at least one time yourself before you use someone else's implementation of it. That way you understand what's going on, even if you're not the one who wrote the code that's being used at the end. Another example. I didn't look at a solution for that problem, but I found a problem on another site and it was nearly identical. So I just used that code and then I changed the output to match the format. So there's going to be some problems that you might have seen something really similar to previously. And it's like, oh, I found a solution to that. And now I'm going to just modify that. This is not okay. So just because it wasn't the 100% identical problem still doesn't mean you can copy code from somewhere else. You're supposed to code it up yourself. Okay, it's not okay to find similar things and just modify them. Another example. Oh, I wrote up Dijkstra's algorithm before in 221, and I just used that for this problem. Is that okay? Well, yes, this is your code. It's something you implemented. Dijkstra's is a general algorithm. It is fine to use that. Okay, so there's not a restriction on you using your own code that you have written before. Don't use other people's code. You can use your own code. Okay, here's another one. I knew this was a depth-first search problem, so I looked at a website that showed how to do depth-first search. Is that okay? Well, yes, it's fine. And in fact, it's probably a good thing because you're looking up and understanding how an algorithm works. Okay, so you analyzed the problem. You said, oh, I know what I need. I need depth first search. I don't remember the details about how that works. So I'm going to look up depth first search and understand how to do that. And then I'm going to code it myself. Now, if you just went and you copied DFS code from somewhere, that's not okay, right? You shouldn't be blindly copying code from the website, but it is certainly okay to understand how an algorithm works, especially a general algorithm like DFS. Another example. Oh, I solved a really similar problem on my own a year ago. I copied that code and modified it for this program. Is that okay? Well, yes, it is okay. It's not the best practice. I would prefer that you just solve it again. If you solved it once, you can do it again, and it will help you reinforce how to do it. But since it's your own code that you solved previously, it's okay to use that. And I would say it's even okay if you happen to have solved the exact same problem before. Maybe you've done some problems on Caddis or something like that, and you've solved that problem. It is actually okay to reuse that code that you have written by yourself previously. Another example, I found an online implementation of MaxFlow, and I just used that. No, you need to code things yourself. You can't just copy code from online, even if it's something somewhat general like MaxFlow. Okay. Now, if there's always a little bit of a borderline between what's just syntax and what's actually copying code. So yes, sometimes you have to look up the syntax for how a command works. And so you're copying syntax for like a function call and what the parameters are. But that's different from I'm going to copy a whole algorithms code. So try to code it yourself. Don't just copy code from other places. Another one, I found an online discussion of MaxFlow and I followed that to write my solution. Yeah, that's probably okay. You're looking up a general topic online and you're writing your own code based on what you learned. Again, don't just copy the code, but it's okay to look at a general description. All right, so the last area I want to talk about are kind of the big thing these days, which is ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, all the LLM-based stuff. I'm not going to try to list every possibility out there, but there are lots and lots of these resources out there. And I want to first acknowledge that when you get out of A&M and you are working in a professional environment, there's a very good chance that these tools will be available and used by you in a working environment. Okay, so let's be clear. All of these AI coding assistant tools are going to be a part of your coding life going forward. But I want you to also understand that is not the purpose of you being in this class. Okay, you're not in this class so that you can code like you are in a professional environment. That's not what we're doing here. That's not the educational purpose of the course. And so the rule that we're going to have is for this course, all of these things are off limits. Okay, so that means not even part of your code should you use these tools for. Okay, don't just translate them to another language, don't use them at all. Okay, so it's just an off limits thing. Now, this is going to be different from other courses here at A&M. Other courses might encourage you to use them in some circumstances or lots of circumstances, but for this class, they're off limits. Okay, so I don't want to see you pulling up any of the stuff in lab. I don't want to hear that you've used it to help you do things in your code. Those are off limits. We're trying to get you to learn how to do these things. And this is a shortcut that is going to hurt your learning in this course. That's why I am having you stay away from it for this class. Okay, I teach other classes where I don't necessarily mind people using some of these tools. This is not one of those classes. All right. So here's a couple of examples. So you say, I needed a function to sort pairs of integers based on the second integer in the pair. So I used something just to write that function for me. It's just a basic function. Is that okay? Well, no. Like I said, using tools is not allowed in this class. Point is to write these yourself. And pretty much if Copilot or whatever could write it for you, you should be able to write it yourself. Okay, another example. I wrote my code in Python. It was too slow. So I used ChatGPT to translate my own Python code to C++ and just edited that. Is that okay? No, like I said, you can't use these tools for this class. The point is to write them and solve them yourself. You need to code it up in C++ yourself. And again, if ChatGPT could write it for you, you can write it yourself. Okay, so I realize it's faster. I realize it's a shortcut. And I realize you did the problem analysis yourself and even wrote code yourself, and it was just a speed thing, and you're just translating. Still not okay for this course. Okay, not something you're allowed to do. Okay, one more. Oh, I didn't split it up. I gave you the answer already, but I didn't use any code from ChatGPT, but I gave it the problem and asked how to solve it. And then I followed those directions. So you didn't actually have it write code for you, but you had it do the problem analysis for you. So again, no, because these tools are not allowed in this class. So I will say that the spirit of this does sort of fit with what would be allowed during the upsolve period. I admit that, okay, because during upsolving, getting help on the solution method, but not the code itself, is something that's allowed. And so if you said, ChatGPT, give me the instructions for how I might go about solving this problem, and it gave you something, uh, I would say in general, that would be in the spirit of what would be allowed during upsolving, but it is not allowed in this course. So the course rule is that this is not allowed. Okay, there's plenty of other ways you will be able to get that information that are allowed. Like I said, we go over stuff in class. You can talk to other people in class during the upsolve period, So you do not need to use a tool like ChatGPT to do this. Okay, so not allowed. Just stay away from it. So again, for this course, all of this stuff is off limits. And so I will just mention, even outside of this class, be very careful about what you use and try to make sure that you understand what's okay in classes and not. There's also still a bunch of this is all still pretty new, even though it's a few years now that it's been out. People are still trying to understand what's allowed and what's not. There's cases working through the court system about intellectual property and how things have been used. We've had at least one of our own faculty who discovered that their own copyrighted code was getting pulled in by Copilot into other people's code, which is not allowed. So like there's some really tricky things out there. So don't just assume that all of this is necessarily allowed even now. Just be careful. Again, for this class, off limits completely. Even outside of this class, be careful. All right, so just to summarize, the goal of this course is for you to determine how to solve problems, implement them, and test them. And so anything that's interfering with that is not good. And that includes you preventing people from coming up with their own solution by talking to them when you shouldn't, or you getting the solution from someone else, or from an online source, or from an AI tool. Okay, so if you can't come up with the solution yourself, you can't figure out how to do it, that's what the upsolving period is for. And in all the parts of this, you're supposed to be writing your own code. This is supposed to be helping you develop your own code writing skills. Now, at the same time, use a little bit of common sense. I'm not trying to say don't discuss anything with anyone else. Use a little bit of common sense here about what's okay and not. That's why I ran through all the scenarios, is to try to clarify that a little bit more. So be reasonable, but pay attention to what we said. If you're ever in doubt, talk to me or the TAs. It's always better to err on the side of caution. And whatever you do, don't ask other people to put themselves in compromising situations. That's not a nice thing to do to other people. You don't want to, it's awkward for someone to have to tell someone else, no, I think you're doing something dishonest. And it puts them in a very uncomfortable position as well. Okay, thanks for listening.